Amina never thought one small decision could change her path. That morning started like many others in her modest neighborhood. She was making tea when her older sister Noor entered the kitchen, pale and coughing. Noor worked as a maid in one of the city's luxury apartments. The job was hard but important, it kept food on the table. But today she could barely stand. Amina put her hand on Noor's forehead. "You're burning up," she said softly. Noor shook her head. "I can't miss work. The family depends on me. He is an important client, the CEO, remember?" Her voice was weak. Amina thought quickly. Their mother had just returned from a night shift at the hospital. She was exhausted. Noor couldn't possibly go out in this state. So Amina, though she had her own errands and studies, made a choice. "I'll go in your place. Just for today. Rest. I'll handle it." Noor looked at her in surprise. You've never worked in that apartment. It's very different. Very strict." Amina smiled with gentle confidence. "You taught me everything. I can do it." By 8 a.m., Amina was on the bus to the wealthy part of the city. She held Noor's uniform neatly ironed in a bag. She wore plain sandals, her hair tied simply, her eyes determined. As she stepped into the towering building, she felt the difference immediately. The lobby was covered in marble, the air cool and scented with flowers, the staff dressed in suits. She quietly told the doorman she was filling in for her sister. The elevator ride felt endless. She adjusted her scarf, took a deep breath, and pressed the bell of the high-floor apartment. A tall man opened the door, phone pressed to his ear. He looked tired, distracted. His shirt was crisp but his eyes showed sleepless nights. This was Arman Khalid, the CEO her sister always mentioned in whispers. Without a word, he pointed inside and returned to his call. Amina stepped in carefully. The apartment was beautiful but messy in a rushed way. A plate of half-eaten toast lay on the counter, a coffee cup with dried stains sat on the table, and school papers were scattered near the couch. As she began to tidy, Amina noticed a backpack lying open. A sketchbook had fallen out. She picked it up carefully and saw lovely drawings, shapes, houses, people with wide smiles. But she also noticed something else, words erased again and again, faint pencil marks showing struggle. She put the book back gently. A soft sound made her turn. From the hallway, a boy peeked out. He looked around 8 years old, wearing a wrinkled school shirt. His eyes were cautious, almost guarded, but curious. This must be Sammy, the CEO's son. Amina smiled warmly. "Hello. I'm Amina. I'm helping your dad today." The boy said nothing, just nodded and disappeared back inside. She continued her work. She washed the dishes, organized the papers by date, and wiped the counters until they shone. She noticed a note on the fridge from the school reading support recommended for Sammy. She quietly memorized the words. After an hour, Arman ended his call. He looked around the apartment, surprised at the calm order. "You're new," he said, his tone brisk but not unkind. Amina bowed her head slightly. "I'm covering for Noor today. She's unwell." He nodded, distracted again by his watch. "Thank you. Leave the invoice with the desk." Before leaving, Amina placed a short note by the kitchen. "Breakfast dishes are done. I organized the school papers by date. Amina." On her way back home, she wondered why she felt such a pull toward that apartment. It was not just the beauty of it. It was the quiet sadness in Sammy's eyes, the heavy tiredness in Arman's face. They had everything yet seemed unsettled. Amina thought of Noor and hoped she would recover quickly, but deep in her heart, she sensed that her day in that home was not over. That evening, Arman noticed the note on the counter. It was written in careful, neat handwriting. He read it twice. Something about its simplicity felt different, like someone had not only cleaned his house but also noticed the small chaos that ruled his mornings. He placed the note in the drawer instead of throwing it away. Meanwhile, Sammy sat on his bed with his sketchbook. He thought of the maid who had smiled kindly at him, who hadn't laughed at his silence or hurried him away. She had said hello like she truly meant it. For the first time in weeks, he felt less alone. And so, without anyone planning it, a quiet connection had begun, born not out of wealth or duty, but from a small act of care. Amina didn't know it yet, but covering her sister's shift would open a door she never imagined, leading her to become part of a story where a single father and his son needed her more than she could have guessed. The following morning, the sky was heavy with clouds and the sound of soft rain echoed across the tall buildings of the city. Amina thought she was finished with her small duty the day before, but fate had other plans. Noor was still weak and coughing, unable to return to work. The phone rang early, and it was the house manager from the CEO's apartment asking if Noor could come again. Without hesitation, Amina volunteered to cover one more time. She tied her scarf, held her bag close, and stepped out into the damp streets with quiet determination. By the time she arrived, the rain had grown stronger, forcing many cars to stop near the apartment entrance. The luxury building lobby was full of people with umbrellas dripping water on the polished floor. When the elevator doors opened at the CEO's floor, she found the apartment in an unusual state of busyness. Several men in suits stood near the doorway with files in hand. Laptops, folders, and umbrellas cluttered the living room. A last-minute meeting had been moved into the home because of the weather. Armin, the CEO, paced around the living room with his phone in one hand and papers in the other. His face showed the strain of deadlines and responsibilities. He glanced up only briefly when he noticed Amina. "Noor is still sick?" he asked quickly. Amina nodded politely. "Yes, sir. She asked me to cover again." Without another word, he waved his hand toward the kitchen and continued his phone call. The house looked restless, and the staff seemed tense. Amina did not rush. She moved with steady steps, speaking softly to the guests. "Please, you can place your umbrellas here," she said, bringing a tray near the entrance. She guided them on where to leave their wet shoes, careful not to disturb the serious conversations filling the air. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Sammy, the young boy, hovering near the hallway again. He held his sketchbook close to his chest, his eyes searching the room nervously. Amina understood instantly he wanted to sit with his drawings but felt out of place among so many strangers. She quietly created a little quiet corner by the side table near the window. She set a lamp there, arranged a small plate of fruit, and placed a cushion on the chair. Then she bent down slightly and whispered to Sammy, "Would you like to sit here? It's your corner." For a moment he hesitated, then nodded. He settled into the chair, sketchbook open on his lap. But Amina could see something else in his eyes: frustration. When he tried to read the captions beneath his drawings, the words seemed to trouble him. His pencil erased lines again and again. Amina remembered how she had helped her younger cousins with reading at home. She took a note card from the side drawer and slid it beneath the line of words, covering the others so that Sammy could focus on one line at a time. "Shall we try one word together?" she asked gently. Sammy's small voice read the first word, slow but steady. She smiled. "Perfect. Now the next." They worked like this slowly, with patience, celebrating each small success. The boy's shoulders relaxed. For the first time that day, his face softened into a shy smile. He began to draw pictures to match the words, turning the reading task into a game. Amina praised him lightly, careful not to make him feel pressured. While this quiet scene unfolded, Armin glanced over during his meeting. He saw his son sitting calmly, fruit untouched but sketchbook open, actually reading aloud tiny words. The sight made Armin pause mid-sentence. His eyes rested on Amina for a second longer than usual. He realized that in the middle of his chaotic work, his son was not restless or lonely. He was comforted. When the meeting ended hours later, the apartment was in order. The umbrellas were neatly placed, the table cleared, and the atmosphere strangely calm despite the heavy rain outside. One of the visiting staff members even commented, "It's rare to see a homestay so organized during an urgent meeting." As the last guest left, Armin put his phone down for once. He looked around, taking in the neatness of the apartment. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer than before. "It went smoother than I expected." Amina bowed her head slightly, wiping the last drops of water from the floor. "I'm glad I could help." She didn't mention the small corner she had created for Sammy or the reading practice they shared. She didn't think it was her place to explain. But later that evening, when Armin went to check on his son, he found a small page lying on Sammy's desk. It was a drawing of a boy holding a book with simple words beneath, "I can read today." The letters were shaky, but clear. Armin held the page quietly, thinking of the maid who had not only kept his house running but had somehow reached his son in a way he hadn't managed for months. For the first time in a long while, he felt a moment of relief, not because of business success, but because of something far more personal. Amina, on the bus ride home, felt tired but strangely satisfied. She thought of Sammy's little smile and the way the rain had not disturbed his calm once he had his corner. She thought of Armin's brief thank you and the way the home seemed to breathe easier. She told herself it was just a temporary duty, just one more day helping her sister. But deep inside, she knew that her role in that house was already becoming something more than just filling in for Noor. The next morning began with the same grey skies, but inside the apartment a new kind of storm was waiting. Armin had an important investor meeting later that day, and the pressure showed on his face the moment Amina stepped inside. Papers were spread across the table, calls came one after another, and assistants rushed in and out with worried expressions. Amina quietly slipped into her routine. She tidied the kitchen, organized the hallway, and tried not to get in the way. But halfway through her work, she noticed tension building between the staff. One assistant whispered that a crucial folder with the prototype summary had gone missing. Without it, the investor meeting could collapse. Armin's eyes grew dark with worry. He asked his staff to check everywhere under piles of papers, in drawers, even in the car. Nothing appeared. Then a quiet remark from one junior staffer stung the air like a knife, "Maybe the new maid moved it." The words made Amina's chest tighten. She had worked carefully, never touching anything important. Still, she stayed calm, though her hands felt cold. Instead of defending herself right away, she thought carefully. She remembered something from the previous day. Sammy had been drawing and sometimes took papers without understanding their importance. Children often treated adult things as part of their world of toys. With gentle steps, Amina went to the corner where Sammy kept his belongings. She crouched beside his toy bin, moving aside crayons, a toy car, and small building blocks. And there it was, the missing folder, tucked safely beside his sketchbook. The papers were unbent, untouched, as if Sammy had placed them there for safekeeping. Amina carried the folder back into the living room. "I found this in the toy bin," she said calmly. Her voice was soft but steady. "I believe Sammy wanted to protect it after seeing everyone so worried." The room fell silent. The junior staffer who had doubted her lowered his eyes. Armin looked directly at her for the first time in days, his expression mixed with relief and regret. He took the folder and said, "Thank you. And I owe you an apology. I shouldn't have allowed suspicion to fall on you." Amina simply nodded, her heart steady again. She didn't want recognition, she only wanted peace restored. But she saw something in Armin's face, a kind of respect, quiet but real. She didn't stop there. Carefully, she suggested an idea. "If I may, important papers could have one place only. Maybe a tray by the door, so nothing gets lost in the rush. And every evening, you and Sammy could put tomorrow's things in a small basket together. It may save time and worry." At first, Armin looked surprised. No maid had ever suggested systems for his household. But the simplicity of the idea struck him. He could already imagine mornings smoother, fewer frantic searches. He gave a small nod. That sounds useful. Thank you. From that day, the red tray appeared on the console near the entrance. A basket was placed by the hallway for Sammy's school items. They became part of the routine. It wasn't just about keeping things in order, it was about creating calm where once there was only chaos. Later that evening, Armin stood by his office window, holding the folder in his hand. He thought about how easily he had doubted the young woman who had only brought peace into his home. He thought about how she had not only solved a problem but offered a solution that touched both his work and his son's life. For a man used to control and command, it was humbling to realize that kindness and observation could do more than pressure ever could. Sammy, in his room, was drawing again. But this time, he added words beneath the picture of a basket. They were simple letters, uneven but clear: my basket, my things. He smiled to himself, remembering how Amina had praised him for small efforts. When Amina left the apartment that night, she didn't think of herself as special. She only felt grateful that she could help Noor keep her job safe. But without knowing it, she had already taken her first steps into a deeper role in that household. She had earned trust not through grand actions but through small, thoughtful care. Armin watched her leave from the window. For the first time in months, he felt his home was not just a place of rushing schedules and silent dinners. It was becoming something warmer. And though he didn't say it aloud, he knew this change began the moment Amina walked in to cover her sister's shift. The following days in Armin's apartment carried a different feeling. The air of tension that once lingered in the rooms began to soften little by little. The red tray by the entrance became part of the rhythm of the household. Every evening, Amina placed incoming papers there, and every morning, Sammy placed his school bag beside the small basket she had suggested. What once caused rushing and shouting now became a calm routine. Amina noticed small gaps in the daily life of the home, and she quietly filled them without making a show of it. When Sammy forgot to bring his water bottle to school, she placed it by the door the next day as a reminder. When Armin's suits were wrinkled from hurried packing, she pressed them neatly so he could leave with confidence. But more than chores, she brought something less visible yet more valuable: order with warmth. Sammy grew attached to her gentle ways. Every afternoon, he would wait near the window, sketchbook in hand, ready to show her his drawings. With patience, she encouraged him to read the words he had written beneath each picture. "One line is enough," she often said, never pushing him too far. Slowly, the boy's confidence grew. He began reading short paragraphs aloud, his voice still shy but less uncertain than before. One evening, when Armin finally managed to leave work early, he found Sammy and Amina sitting together at the dining table. Amina was reading from a storybook, and Sammy was completing the last words of each line. Armin stood at the doorway quietly, listening. For the first time in months, he heard his son laugh while reading. The sound filled the apartment in a way business calls never could. Over the next week, Amina introduced more small systems. She wrote a simple checklist on the fridge: school bag, lunchbox, shoes, homework. Sammy enjoyed ticking the boxes each morning, turning a stressful routine into a small game. She placed color stickers on his folders so he could tell them apart easily. These little adjustments might have seemed ordinary, but to Armin they were priceless. He no longer had to spend mornings searching for missing items or evenings listening to complaints from teachers. His home felt balanced for the first time. When Noor finally recovered and returned to work, she was touched to see how her younger sister had handled everything. "You did more than cover for me," Noor whispered one evening when Amina came home. "You made their home different." Amina shook her head modestly. "I only noticed what was already there. I just helped arrange it." But Armin had noticed the difference too, in ways he could not ignore. One afternoon, after Sammy proudly showed him a small certificate from school for steady reading progress, he called Amina into the living room. His tone was more personal than professional this time. "You've done more than keep the house in order, he said quietly. You've given my son something I could not confidence. For that, I am grateful. He then made an unexpected offer. Noor could continue as the main housekeeper, but Amina would be hired separately as a part-time family assistant, focusing on Sammy's after-school routine and small household systems. The role was more stable and better paid. You understand, my son, Armin explained. He trusts you. That is not something I can overlook. At first, Amina hesitated. She had dreams of her own. She wanted to continue her evening classes, to build a better future. Taking on more hours might interfere with her studies. She voiced this gently, not wanting to appear ungrateful. Armin listened carefully and then replied, my company has an education stipend for staff. Household employees can apply through HR as well. If you accept this role, I'll make sure you can continue your studies. The words left Amina speechless for a moment. Here was a chance to support her family, help Sammy, and still pursue her own education. It was not only an offer of work but of respect. She asked for time to discuss it with Noor and their parents. That evening at home, the family gathered around the small dinner table as Amina explained the proposal. Noor smiled with pride, their mother nodded in support, and even their younger cousins cheered. They all agreed that this was not just a job but an opportunity. Amina felt a quiet warmth in her chest, knowing her family believed in her. Meanwhile, in his study, Armin reflected on the changes in his home. He had started the month with nothing but pressure, investors, deadlines, and the weight of single parenthood. Yet, in a short time, his apartment no longer felt like a place of stress. It felt lived in, cared for, and even hopeful. He realized that sometimes leadership wasn't about commanding from the top but about noticing the small hands that hold everything together. Sammy, unaware of the larger decisions, only knew that his world was brighter. He had someone who believed in his small victories, who turned chores into games and reading into art. For him, Amina wasn't just a helper, she was the bridge between silence and courage. And so, the household entered a new chapter, shaped by simple routines, warm encouragement, and an unspoken understanding. It was no longer just about covering a shift. It was about building a life where care and kindness stood beside success and responsibility. The next week began with a clear sky, and for the first time in many days, the apartment felt calm when Amina arrived. She walked in with her usual quiet smile, placed her bag in the corner, and checked the red tray by the door. The papers were stacked neatly, a small note on top in Armin's handwriting, HR at 2 p.m. to discuss roles. Thank you. She read it with careful attention and then looked around. The home was the same furniture, same windows, same city view, but the mood was new. It was as if the rooms now breathed at a slower, kinder pace. Sammy rushed out of his bedroom, holding a small booklet from school. I have a reading day next Friday, he said, eyes bright and nervous at the same time. Do I have to read out loud? Amina knelt to his eye level. Only if you want to, she answered softly. We can practice together. One line at a time. Like before. He nodded, comfort returning to his small shoulders, and placed the booklet carefully in the basket by the hallway, his new habit making him feel capable. At 2 in the afternoon, Armin came home from the office in time for the meeting. He had removed his tie and rolled his sleeves in a way that made him look less like a rushing executive and more like a father who wanted to be present. HR arrived with a folder and a warm, professional smile. The conversation was brief but meaningful. Noor would remain the main housekeeper with her regular hours. Amina would have a separate, part-time role as a family assistant focused on systems, after-school support for Sammy, and coordination with school and home routines. The schedule would protect Amina's evenings for her classes, and the company's education stipend would help with her tuition if she qualified. Amina listened carefully and asked simple questions. Can I keep 4 evenings free for classes? Can we write the schedule and the boundaries clearly? HR nodded. Everything was put into writing. Armin added one more line before signing, protected study time for Amina 6 to 9 p.m., 4 days a week. He gave her the pen, and she signed with steady hands. It was a small signature, but to her it felt like a quiet promise to her future. Noor stood at the doorway after the meeting, a proud smile in her eyes. When HR left, she wrapped her arms around her sister for a quick hug. This was the right choice, Noor whispered. I'll handle mornings and deep cleaning. You handle afternoons and the systems only you can see. Amina laughed softly. It's a team effort. They celebrated that evening not with a big party but with simple joy. Amina brewed cinnamon tea, and Noor sliced some fruit. Armin joined them at the table for a few minutes before bedtime. It was unusual for him, but he seemed to enjoy hearing Noor tell a funny story from years ago and Amina share a small victory from her last exam. Sami sat beside his father, holding the edge of his sleeve in a quiet, happy way. The table felt like home, a place where voices overlapped not to compete but to connect. The days took on a gentle rhythm. After school, Amina and Sami would spend an hour at the dining table with the booklet for reading day. They set clear rules that made the task feel friendly: 2 short readings, a 5-minute break, 1 small drawing, and a little stretch. Amina kept a note card under the line to help his eyes stay focused. Every time he finished a line, she would say, "Done. Look how far you came." He began to say it himself, smiling, "Done. Look how far I came." In the background, Amina carefully built more small systems. A single folder for school communication went into a drawer with a label. A small whiteboard near the kitchen showed the weekly plan in neat, large letters: school projects, library day, PE day. A row of hooks near the door held Sami's bag and jacket. Armin often paused at the whiteboard before leaving for work, nodding to himself as if this little map kept his mind steady. One afternoon, the phone rang. It was Sami's teacher calling with an update. "He's reading more," the teacher shared. "He's still shy, but he attempts lines without looking away. Whoever is guiding him at home, please tell them it's working." Amina wrote the words on a sticky note and placed it on the whiteboard. "It's working." When Armin came home, he saw the note and stood for a long moment, grateful but quiet, like a man who had found something he had lost but wasn't sure how. As Friday approached, Sami asked more questions about reading day. "What if I forget a word?" "Then you breathe in," Amina replied, showing him with her hand, "and look at the first letter. It will remind you. And if it doesn't, you can smile and say, 'I'll try again.' The room won't fall. You will still be you." The boy giggled at the thought of a room falling and repeated her words, "I'll try again." On the morning of the reading day, the apartment felt like a little headquarters. Noor laid out a clean shirt for Sami. Amina placed the booklet by the door. Armin wrapped a small chocolate in paper and tucked it into his pocket for after, he told Sami with a wink. They left together, not in a rush, but in a calm line that felt like a routine they had practiced many times. The classroom was bright and filled with parents and quiet chatter. Children sat on a colorful rug, each waiting for their turn. When it was Sami's turn, he stood, hands slightly trembling but eyes steady. He opened the booklet. Amina and Armin watched from the back, hands folded, breaths held without knowing it. The first line came out slow, then smoother, then strong enough to carry to the end of the page. He stumbled once, looked at the first letter, took a breath, and tried again. The room did not fall. It simply stayed, kind and warm, as he reached the final word. The teacher smiled. A small, polite applause filled the room, not loud, not big, just enough to feel like a hand on the shoulder. Afterward, in the schoolyard, Armin knelt and handed Sami the little wrapped chocolate. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Not for reading perfectly. For staying when it was hard." Sami leaned into his father. Amina stood nearby, her smile quiet but bright. She felt like the wind that carried a paper plane, unseen but important. That evening, something special happened that no one planned. When Amina returned to the apartment after her class, she found a handmade card on the red tray. It was made from folded drawing paper. On the front, a simple pencil sketch of a basket and a book. Inside, careful letters, "Thank you for helping me read. I can breathe better now." The signature at the bottom was a little lopsided, "Sammy." Amina held the card for a long time. She placed it on the shelf near the lamp, not as decoration but as a reminder of what care can do when it is consistent and kind. When Armin came out of his study, he noticed where she had put it. He nodded, eyes soft. "He made that after dinner," he said. Took him a long time to get the words right. He insisted. In the following days, Armin kept another quiet promise. He adjusted his own schedule to be home for bedtime 3 nights in a row each week. It wasn't always easy, but he tried. He read the first line of the story and let Sammy finish the last word. If a call came, he waited a minute longer before answering. The apartment learned this new rhythm and grew to expect it, the way a garden expects sunlight. Amina's life changed too, but it did not lose the shape of her dreams. She attended her classes in the evening, studied at a small desk at home, and still arrived each afternoon with the same steady steps. She carried a planner in her bag with simple checkboxes, "Sammy reading plus 2 lines. Papers to red tray. Whiteboard update. Water bottle by door." Each box, when ticked, felt like a step forward for everyone. Noor, watching all of this, felt proud of both her job and her sister's new role. They spoke in the kitchen sometimes, softly, when the house was quiet. "Do you think this will last?" Noor asked once. Amina looked at the whiteboard, the hooks, the basket, the red tray. "I think good habits last," she said. "And kindness lasts even longer." One afternoon, HR sent a letter confirming the education stipend for Amina's next term. Attached was a short note, recommended by Mr. Khalid. She held the paper close, surprised by the warmth in her chest. It was one thing to be thanked, it was another to be believed in. The story did not end with a big party or a grand speech. It ended in the small, beautiful ways that real life often does. A father learned to pause. A child learned to read with less fear. 2 sisters held steady, one caring for the home, the other caring for the spaces between tasks where hearts grow. And a young woman continued to notice the little things that others walked past, building systems out of common sense and gentleness. On a quiet evening months later, the city lights shimmered outside the tall windows. Amina set the last dish to dry and turned off the kitchen light. She checked the red tray, now a simple, trusted anchor by the door. She placed a small note there before leaving, written in the same neat handwriting as her first day, "Tomorrow's papers organized. Sammy's reading page marked. Whiteboard updated. Amina." Armin saw the note later and smiled. He kept it, like he kept the first one, in the same drawer where he stored things that mattered. He knew now what he had needed from the start, not more hours or louder meetings, but a home that felt cared for and a son who felt seen. And he knew who had helped him find it. As for Amina, she walked down to the street with light steps. She had a bus to catch and a chapter to read for class. She felt tired in a good way, the kind of tired that comes from doing work that matters and living a life that points forward. She looked up at the night sky and whispered to herself, one line at a time. Then she smiled and kept moving. Sometimes a house needs more than cleaning, it needs attention, kindness, and a few simple systems that keep love from getting lost. And sometimes, the person who comes in just to cover a shift ends up covering the distance between busy lives and what truly matters, steadily, gently, one small habit at a time.